The light that filters through the window in the late afternoon has a quality like honey, thick and golden, catching the dust motes as they dance in lazy spirals through the air. It's a peaceful light, the kind that settles over a life that has found its quiet rhythm. It warms the spines of the books on the shelves, gleams on the silver frames holding pictures of a smiling woman with my eyes, and her children, my grandchildren, their laughter almost audible in the stillness. A hand-knitted afghan, its colors softened with age and use, is draped over the back of my armchair, a testament to countless comfortable, tranquil evenings. This room is a sanctuary, built not of wood and plaster, but of resolved memories and hard-won peace. My fingers, mapped with the fine lines of nearly 70 years, trace the worn edges of the photograph I'm holding. It's a small, rectangular portal to another lifetime. The corners are soft, rounded from decades of being tucked away and taken out again, a relic examined in private moments. The color has leached out over time. The vibrant Texas sun of that day mellowed into a hazy, dreamlike wash of pastel blue sky and faded green grass. We are so young in the picture. The girl, me, has a smile that stretches so wide it seems to threaten to split her face in two, a pure, unvarnished broadcast of a joy so profound it feels like a discovery. Her eyes, my eyes, are alight with a future she believes is written in stone, a storybook she is certain she holds in her hands. And then there is the boy, Jake. His arm is slung casually around the girl's shoulder, a gesture of easy ownership. His smile is the kind that used to disarm cities, a flash of perfect white teeth and a charming crinkle at the corner of his eyes. It's a cover model's smile, practiced and devastatingly effective. For years, that was all I saw. But now, with the distance of a lifetime, my gaze bypasses the dazzling smile and lands on his eyes. There's a gloss to them, a hard, bright sheen like polished glass. There is no depth, no shared light with the girl he's holding. It's the predatory stillness of a hunter who has already mesmerized his prey. People expect you to cry when you talk about the great love of your life. They expect stories of starlit nights and breathless romance, a narrative softened and sanctified by time. They anticipate a tremor in your voice, a gentle, wistful sorrow for what was lost to the unforgiving march of years. It's a script we're all handed, the story of the one who got away, or the one who was taken too soon. But looking at this photograph, no tears come. My eyes are dry. The emotion that rises in me isn't sadness. It's a chill, a deep and ancient cold that has nothing to do with the temperature of the room. It's the memory of frostbite on the soul. I don't feel grief for what was lost, because what I thought I had was never real. It was a stage, meticulously designed and beautifully lit, and I was the lead actress who didn't know she was in a play. The man in this picture wasn't the great love of my life. He was the architect of my greatest trial, the builder of a cage with invisible bars, a painter of false, perfect skies. He was a lesson, the kind you don't think you can survive while you're learning it. But that lesson, in its own brutal way, was also a gift, because in the crucible of the hell he created, I was forced to forge a strength I never knew I had. In the end, he was the unwitting father of my greatest victory, the catalyst for the life that brought forth the smiling woman in the silver frames on my mantelpiece. His name was Jake. I say it aloud to the quiet room, the single syllable falling into the silence without an echo. It no longer holds power over me. It's just a name, a label for a ghost. My fingers release their grip, and I place the photograph face down on the small, polished mahogany table beside my chair. It makes a soft, final sound. I don't need to look at it anymore. The story isn't in that faded square of paper. It lives inside me, every detail as sharp and clear as the day it happened. My gaze drifts past the frame of the window, past my reflection as an older woman, a survivor. I see beyond it, back through the decades, to a city humming with heat and music and limitless, dangerous possibility. The air in my memory is thick with the scent of hot asphalt, barbecue smoke, and the cheap beer we used to drink on sweltering weeknights. I can feel the thrum of a bass guitar vibrating up through the soles of my worn-out boots, and the blinding, brilliant Texas sun on my skin. I can see the girl with the wide, hopeful smile, standing on the edge of her life, about to step into the arms of the handsome, smiling boy with the glass eyes. And I let the memory take me, pulling me back into the heart of the fire. That fire of memory consumes the quiet, honeyed light of the present, and the world reshapes itself around me. The scent of steeped tea is replaced by the unmistakable smell of damp earth, spilled beer, and pulsing human energy. I am no longer in my armchair. I am 24 years old again, standing in the sprawling green expanse of Zilker Park, caught in the magnetic pull of 1,000 bodies moving as one. The Austin night is a thick, velvet blanket, but the air itself vibrates, charged by the towering speakers flanking a makeshift stage. An indie band whose name I've already forgotten is thrashing through their final song, a glorious, distorted wall of sound that washes over the crowd. I was there with Chloe. We had staked out a patch of grass hours earlier, armed with a checkered blanket and a thermos of cheap white wine, feeling impossibly adult and free. But the crowd had surged, a living tide, and in the joyous chaos, we were swept apart. Now, I'm craning my neck, trying to catch a glimpse of Chloe's bright red jacket, a hopeless task in the sea of denim and plaid. I'm standing behind a man whose shoulders are so broad they seem to block out the entire stage, and I sigh in frustration, resigning myself to just listening. "Tough view back here, huh?" a voice says, smooth and low, directly beside my ear. I jump, startled. I hadn't felt anyone approach. I turn and my breath catches. The stage lights cast strange, shifting colors across the crowd, but even in the chaotic gloom, he is clear. He is sharp-edged and perfectly composed amidst the swirl of motion. Tall, with dark hair that falls just so over his brow, and a smile that seems to generate its own light. It's him. It's Jake. "You look like you're trying to solve the mysteries of the universe from behind that guy's head," he adds, his eyes crinkling with that devastating charm. A laugh bursts out of me, surprising myself. Something like that. "Mostly just trying to find my friend. The one in the red jacket? Saw her heading towards the food trucks about 10 minutes ago. Seemed on a mission for tacos." He says it so casually, as if he's been observing the whole world, cataloging it all. "I'm Jake." "Emma," I say, feeling a blush creep up my neck. He doesn't shake my hand. Instead, he leans in a little closer, creating a small, intimate bubble for just the two of us in the middle of the roaring crowd. "Well, Emma, since the mystery of the red jacket is solved, how about we solve the mystery of the terrible view?" Before I can answer, he gently takes my hand. His is warm and firm, and expertly navigates us through the throng of people, a polite murmur here, a confident nod there, until we emerge into a pocket of space with a clear, perfect view of the stage. "How did you do that?" I ask, amazed. He just winks. Trade secret. The rest of the night felt like a fever dream. The band finished its set, but we stayed, talking as the crowd thinned out around us. He wasn't like other guys. He didn't brag or dominate the conversation. He asked questions. He asked about my job as a junior graphic designer, his eyes lighting up when I talked about a passion project. He asked about the small town I grew up in, and he actually listened to the answer. He made me feel like the most fascinating person in all of Austin. When I finally reconnected with a taco-wielding Chloe, she raised her eyebrows in a silent, impressed question. Jake just smiled his easy smile, shook her hand, and told me he'd call me. I didn't believe him. Guys like that didn't call girls like me. But my phone buzzed the next morning, before I'd even finished my first cup of coffee. "Still thinking about your passion for poster art. You have a great eye. The world needs more of that. Jay." It was the first text of 1,000. That was how it began. Not with a trickle, but with a flood. He didn't just pursue me, he laid siege to my life. This was the love bombing, though I didn't have a name for it then. To me, it was just magic. It was an overwhelming, all-consuming wave of affection and attention that left me breathless. He'd leave a single, perfect gardenia on my car's windshield because I'd once mentioned offhand it was my favorite flower. He'd show up at my apartment after I'd had a terrible day at work, armed with my favorite, ridiculously overpriced gelato and a terrible movie he knew would make me laugh. He learned the rhythm of my life and inserted himself into its every beat. He praised not just my looks, but my mind. "I love the way you think," he'd say, after I'd rambled on about some design theory. "It's so unique. You see the world differently." He complimented my laugh, my kindness to strangers, the way I hummed when I was concentrating. He was mining me for my insecurities and shoring them up with his adoration, making me feel seen and cherished in a way I had only ever read about in books. Our days melted into a sun-drenched montage of idyllic Austin moments. We kayaked on Lady Bird Lake, our paddles dipping into the cool green water in a comfortable rhythm. As the sun bled across the sky, painting the clouds in strokes of orange and purple and casting the downtown skyline into a stark silhouette, he grew quiet. He trailed his fingers in the water and looked at me, his expression serious. "I could get used to this," he said, his voice soft. Us. This view. And in that moment, my heart swelled with a feeling so potent it felt like it would burst from my chest. We explored the food truck parks on South Congress, standing under strings of bare-bulbed lights, sharing greasy, delicious brisket tacos and laughing until our sides ached. He'd wipe a smudge of salsa from my cheek with his thumb, a gesture so tender and intimate it felt more profound than a kiss. He introduced me to his friends, a circle of people as effortlessly charming as he was. They welcomed me instantly, pulling me into their fold. "We've never seen him like this," one of his friends, a guy named Mark, confided in me at a backyard barbecue. "You're really something special, Emma." I drank it all in, believing every word. I was special. This was special. His world became my world. My own friends, like Chloe, saw less and less of me. When she tried to caution me, gently suggesting that things were moving incredibly fast, I brushed her off. "You just don't get it," I'd say, a little defensively. "It's different with him, and it felt different." Because he wasn't just planning dates, he was planning a future. He'd point to a charming little bungalow in Hyde Park as we drove past. "Can't you just picture it?" he'd murmur, taking my hand. A big porch swing, a dog sleeping in a patch of sun in the yard, maybe a couple of kids running through the sprinklers. He spoke of our future as if it were a foregone conclusion, an eventuality as certain as the sun rising. He learned my dreams, to one day open my own small design studio, and he wove himself into them. "We'll do it," he'd say. "We'll find the perfect space. I'll help you build it from the ground up." He created a universe that consisted of only two people, him and me. It was a perfect, shimmering bubble, and inside it, I wasn't just Emma, the quiet girl from a small town trying to make her way. I was a muse, a goddess, the indispensable center of someone else's world. He was the mirror that reflected back a version of me that was wittier, more beautiful, more brilliant than I had ever dared to imagine I could be. I wasn't just falling in love with Jake. I was falling in love with the woman I was when I was with him, blissfully unaware that the mirror was a mirage, and the perfect man holding it was slowly, meticulously, beginning to build my prison. For a time, the bubble remained perfect, shimmering and impermeable. Our life together settled into a routine that felt like a beautiful, continuous dream. Mornings were lazy, filled with the scent of freshly brewed coffee and the comfortable silence of two people who knew each other's rhythms. Evenings were spent exploring Austin's endless offerings or simply curled up on our sofa, my head on his chest, his fingers tracing patterns on my arm. He was my compass, my anchor, the steady center of my world. I believed our love was an unassailable fortress. I didn't realize that the architect of that fortress was already, brick by brick, turning it into a prison. The first crack was almost invisible, a hairline fracture you could only see if the light hit it just right. It began not with a fight, but with a quiet suggestion, a seed of doubt planted so skillfully I barely noticed the soil being tilled. I'd come home one evening, buzzing with energy after grabbing drinks with Chloe. We'd laughed until we cried, brainstorming ridiculous business ideas and dissecting our lives with the fierce, loving honesty that only a best friend can provide. When I told Jake about it, he smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Sounds fun, babe," he said, pulling me close. "I love that you have friends like Chloe. It's just, she's a little wild, don't you think? All that energy. Sometimes I worry she holds you back, that she keeps you from seeing your own sophistication." He framed it as concern, his brow furrowed in that way that always made my heart melt. He was worried about me. I felt a prickle of defensiveness on Chloe's behalf, but it was quickly replaced by a strange, warm glow. He saw a sophistication in me that even my best friend missed. Soon, the seeds were being planted everywhere. I bought a new dress for a gallery opening, a bold, brightly patterned piece that made me feel vibrant and creative. When I modeled it for him, he whistled. "Wow, you look beautiful. You always do." He walked around me, his gaze analytical. "I just think you look so much more elegant, so much classier, in something like that simple blue dress you have. It shows off your grace. This one is a lot." His words were a gentle caress, but the message was clear. My taste was loud, his was refined. I put the new dress back in the closet and wore the blue one. I wanted to be graceful for him. His subtle critiques even began to touch my deepest ambitions. My dream of opening a small design studio was the core of my professional life, the one day I was working towards. I used to talk about it endlessly, my words tumbling out in a rush of excitement. But when I brought it up now, his reaction was different. "Of course, babe, and I'll always support you, 100%, he'd say, stroking my hair. "But think about all that stress, managing clients, paying rent on a studio. It's a nightmare. We have such a perfect, easy life now. Why would you want to complicate it?" He made it sound like he was protecting me from my own ambition, shielding me from a burden I was too fragile to carry. And a small, traitorous part of me started to wonder if he was right. Maybe our perfect bubble was enough. The hairline fracture cracked wide open on a Tuesday. It was the day of the biggest interview of my life. A senior designer position had opened up at one of Austin's most prestigious creative agencies, a place I had only dreamed of working. Landing this job would be a quantum leap for my career. I had spent weeks preparing my portfolio, staying up until 3 a.m, reprinting pages until every layout was flawless, every color perfect. The finished product was a thick, pristine book, bound in black leather, a physical testament to my talent and my hope. It was my future, contained in 20 crisp white pages. That morning, the air in our apartment was thick with my nervous energy. I was dressed in my most professional outfit, the blue dress Jake loved, and was doing one last gasp review of my work at the kitchen island. Jake was moving around me, making coffee, his presence a comforting, solid warmth. He was being wonderfully supportive, telling me how proud he was, how he knew I was going to blow them away. "You ready to go, superstar?" he asked, his voice a warm smile. He turned from the coffee machine, mug in hand, and then it happened. In a moment of impossible, slow-motion horror, he turned, stumbled, and his arm swung out. The dark, steaming coffee arched through the air, a perfect brown parabola that ended its journey directly on the open pages of my portfolio. A strangled cry tore from my throat. "Jake, no!" The rich, dark liquid soaked instantly into the heavy paper, blooming into a hideous, sprawling stain across my best work. A delicate, intricate logo design I had spent a month perfecting. It was ruined. Utterly, irrevocably ruined. "Oh my God," he gasped, his eyes wide with shock. "Babe, I'm so sorry." "It was a complete accident. I was just trying to get past you, I swear." He grabbed a dish towel, dabbing uselessly at the spreading stain, making it worse. Tears of frustration and panic pricked my eyes. "It's ruined, Jake. My interview is in an hour." "Hey, calm down," he said, his voice shifting from apologetic to placating. "It's okay, don't be so dramatic. We can try to blow-dry it or something." "Dramatic?" The word hit me like a slap. "Dramatic? Jake, this was everything." And then, the final masterful twist of the knife. He stepped back, his face a mask of disappointment, not in himself, but in me. "Babe, I said I was sorry. It was an accident." He shook his head slowly. "Honestly, if you're going to get this worked up over a little spilled coffee, are you sure you're even ready for the pressure of a job like that?" The air left my lungs. In the space of 30 seconds, he had transformed from my supporter to my saboteur to my judge. His carelessness had become a referendum on my character. The anger and panic inside me curdled into a hot, sickening shame. Was he right? Was I overreacting? Was I not cut out for this? I looked at the ugly brown stain, and it felt like a verdict. I called the agency and canceled the interview, my voice a hollow whisper as I lied about a sudden illness. Jake held me as I cried, murmuring comforting words, telling me there would be other opportunities. He was the arsonist and the firefighter, the creator of the wound and the one who soothed it with a gentle balm. That incident should have been a siren, a blaring alarm that sent me running. Instead, I let him plaster over the crack, believing his version of events over my own gut feeling. But the foundation was compromised, and it only took one more tremor for the whole facade to collapse. It happened a few weeks later, over something so trivial I can barely recall what it was. I think I'd forgotten to buy the specific brand of almond milk he liked. I came home from the grocery store, and he saw the wrong carton on the counter. I braced myself for a bit of teasing, a playful sigh. Instead, something in him snapped. The shift was instantaneous and terrifying. The charming, easygoing man I loved simply vanished, as if a switch had been flipped. His body went rigid, his jaw clenched so tight a muscle jumped along his cheek. His eyes, those beautiful, laughing eyes, went flat and cold. They became the glass eyes from the photograph. "Are you serious?" he said, his voice stripped of all warmth. It was a low, guttural sound that vibrated with a contained rage. "What? It's just almond milk. I can go back and—" "It's not about the almond milk," he hissed, taking a step towards me. I instinctively took a step back. He followed, his movements slow and deliberate, like a predator cornering its prey. He backed me up against the kitchen wall, his body caging me in. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The quiet, menacing fury was far more terrifying than any shout. He leaned in close, his face inches from mine. "It's about the fact that you can't do one simple thing right. Do you have any idea how stupid you are? How completely insignificant?" His words were like stones, each one striking a new bruise on my soul. "You think any of this?" He gestured with his head to our beautiful apartment, our curated life. "Is because of you, you are nothing. You are a small, clueless girl from a small, forgettable town. You are lucky I even look at you, let alone let you live in my house. You are so lucky to have me." I was frozen. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, but the rest of my body was paralyzed with a terror so profound it felt like dying. This was a monster. A stranger was wearing Jake's face, speaking with Jake's voice, and telling me I was worthless. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't speak. I could only stare into his cold, dead eyes and feel my entire world disintegrate. The next morning, I woke up wrapped in a cocoon of dread. I crept out of the bedroom, expecting to find the monster waiting for me. Instead, charming Jake was in the kitchen, humming along to the radio, flipping pancakes. The air smelled of cinnamon and melted butter. He saw me, and his face broke into a radiant, remorseful smile. "Morning, baby." He rushed over, pulling me into a hug. I was stiff in his arms. He pulled back, his eyes filled with what looked like genuine tears. "Baby, I am so sorry about last night. I don't know what came over me. Work has been so stressful, and I took it out on you. It's not you. It was never you. I would never, ever want to hurt you. Please, can you forgive me?" My mind was a spinning vortex of confusion. The man from last night and the man this morning could not be the same person. It was impossible. It had to have been a nightmare. It was easier to believe the man in front of me now, the one whose tears felt real, whose apology sounded so sincere. On the counter, beside a plate of perfectly cooked pancakes, sat a small, black velvet box. He picked it up and opened it. Inside, nestled against the satin, was a delicate silver necklace with a single tiny diamond that glittered under the kitchen lights. "I saw this the other day, and it made me think of you," he whispered, fastening it around my neck. The metal was cool against my skin. I looked down at the tiny, brilliant stone resting at the base of my throat. It was beautiful. It was a promise. It was an apology. And as I accepted his kiss, forcing a smile onto my face, I felt the unmistakable weight of it. It was a beautiful, glittering manacle, and the lock had just clicked shut. The silver necklace became a talisman of my anxiety. I'd find myself touching it unconsciously, a nervous habit, the cool metal a constant reminder of the line I now had to walk. The weeks that followed that terrible night were a period of unsettling calm, like the glassy, unnaturally still air before a tornado. I was living on a knife's edge, my entire existence dedicated to maintaining the fragile peace. I became a model of serene affection, anticipating Jake's moods, carefully curating my words and actions to be as pleasing and uncomplicated as possible. I didn't talk about my ambitions anymore. I didn't have long, loud phone calls with Chloe. I became smaller, quieter, a ghost in my own life, desperately trying to be the effortless, drama-free woman he seemed to want. For a while it seemed to work. The monster stayed hidden, and the charming man I loved remained. And I told myself that this was what a mature relationship was: compromise. Sacrifice. The end came on a Thursday. It was a day like any other. The Texas sky was a vast, washed-out blue, and the heat was already rising from the pavement. I was in the kitchen, making his favorite pasta dish, focusing on the simple, methodical task of chopping garlic. I was trying to create a perfect evening, a small pocket of domestic bliss that would prove I was worthy, that I was easy to love. He came home from work and didn't kiss me hello. He just dropped his keys into the ceramic bowl by the door with a clatter that sounded too loud in the quiet apartment. I turned from the stove, a bright smile plastered on my face. "Hi, babe. Dinner's almost ready." He didn't return the smile. He looked at me, his face a blank, unreadable mask, and said the words that shattered everything. "This isn't working." My own smile felt frozen on my face. "What? What isn't working?" "The pasta sauce? I can add more oregano." My voice trailed off as I saw the finality in his eyes. This wasn't about dinner. "Us, Emma. This," he said, gesturing vaguely between us. "It's not working." A cold dread, familiar and sickening, washed over me. "What do you mean? What did I do? I've been trying so hard." "That's the problem," he cut in, his voice flat and cold. "You're trying. It's always so much work with you. You're just too much, Emma. You're too emotional." "I can't handle the drama." The words were a masterstroke of cruelty. He was using the very emotions he had provoked, the anxiety, the desperation, the frantic attempts to please him, as his reason for leaving. He had set 1,000 fires and was now blaming me for the smoke. I opened my mouth to argue, to defend myself, but no words came out. What could I say? He had spent months convincing me that he was right. I was too emotional, I was too much. There was no debate. There was no sadness in his eyes, no sign of the man who had claimed to love me just that morning. This was a business transaction. He was closing a deal. As I stood there, mute and shaking, he went into the bedroom. I heard the scrape of a suitcase being pulled from the top of the closet. Within an hour, he had erased himself from our apartment. He packed with a cold, terrifying efficiency, his movements clean and precise. He took his clothes, his books, his coffee mug. He left the necklace on the kitchen counter, right beside the bowl of now-cold pasta sauce. He walked out the door without a backward glance, and then he was gone. The silence he left behind was a physical presence. It was heavier than any sound. For days, I existed in a fog of disbelief and a grief so profound it felt like a physical illness. The apartment, once our shared sanctuary, felt vast and hostile. Every object held a memory. Every empty space was a testament to my failure. I called Chloe, my voice breaking over the phone, and she was there in an instant, her presence a small, warm light in my suffocating darkness. She held me while I sobbed. She threw out the cold pasta, and she listened as I recited Jake's parting words, my voice thick with self-blame. "It's my fault," I wept. "I was too much." "No, honey," Chloe said, her voice fierce. "He's a manipulator. He made you that way." But I couldn't hear her. His voice was the only one in my head. It was about a week after he left that the second wave of the assault began. I was in bed, endlessly scrolling through my phone, a masochistic ritual of looking at old pictures, trying to pinpoint the exact moment it had all gone wrong. On a whim, a desperate, self-destructive impulse, I searched for his name. His profile, once filled with pictures of us, had been scrubbed clean. In their place was a new photo, posted just 2 days earlier. It was him, smiling that brilliant, dazzling smile, his arm wrapped around a woman. She was stunning in a way that felt almost genetically engineered. Her hair was a cascade of perfect, sun-kissed waves. Her teeth were impossibly white. Her skin glowed with health. Her name was Olivia. Her profile was public, a perfectly curated grid of aspirational content. Yoga poses on a scenic cliff, artfully arranged smoothie bowls, selfies in exotic locations captioned with shallow, inspirational quotes. She was a social media influencer. She was polished. She was perfect. She was everything I was not. The caption on Jake's photo of them read, "Sometimes you have to close one chapter to start the one you were always meant to be in." So happy. It was a dagger to my heart. I clicked back to my own profile, my finger hovering over the deactivate button, and then I saw it. A notification bubble, a comment on a photo from 8 months ago, a happy, sun-drenched picture of me on a hike. The username was a random string of numbers. The comment was a single word: pathetic. A jolt, cold and ugly, went through me. I dismissed it as a random internet troll. But then another one appeared, this time on a picture of me and Jake from last Christmas. "No wonder he left you." My breath hitched. Another one, on a selfie from a year ago. "Try harder, lol." They were like tiny digital pricks of a poison needle, appearing on old memories, tainting them, violating my past. They were coming from different anonymous accounts, but they had the same cruel, mocking tone. The attack was quiet, insidious, and deeply personal, and then it escalated. Olivia herself joined the campaign. It was subtle at first, a masterclass in plausible deniability. She posted an Instagram story, a selfie of her looking serene, with the text overlay, "So grateful for a life filled with peace and zero drama." Another day she did a QA session. A conveniently anonymous question appeared: "How do you deal with toxic people?" Her answer was a long, preachy paragraph about the importance of cutting out unstable energy and protecting your peace from desperate, clingy exes. The final blow came on a Sunday night. I was lying in the dark, my phone screen the only light in the room, when a new post from her appeared on my feed. It was a picture of her and Jake, sitting at a fancy restaurant, clinking champagne glasses. They both looked ecstatic, impossibly happy. Her caption was the final, devastating twist of the knife, a public declaration of war disguised as a love note. "Dodged a bullet," it read, "and ran straight into heaven." My heartbreak curdled into something else. Humiliation. Fear. I was no longer just a woman grieving a lost love. I was a target. My private pain had been stolen from me and twisted into a public spectacle. The man I had loved had not just left me. He had sicked his perfect new girlfriend on me, and together they were dismantling my sanity, one cruel comment, one pointed post at a time. The apartment was my prison, and my phone was the window through which my tormentors could watch me, mock me, and ensure I understood that I was utterly, completely alone. My world had shrunk to the size of a glowing screen. I existed in a state of suspended animation, moving between my bed and the sofa, my phone a permanent extension of my hand. Sleep offered no escape. It was shallow and fitful, punctuated by nightmares where anonymous, shadowy figures pointed and laughed. I barely ate, my stomach in a constant churning knot. A wave of nausea would wash over me as I scrolled past a photo of Olivia and Jake, looking radiant on a weekend getaway, and I'd chalk it up to disgust, to the physical manifestation of my own misery. Of course I felt sick. My body was simply rebelling against the poison I was feeding it, the endless cycle of digital self-flagellation. The exhaustion was the worst part. It was a leaden weight in my bones, a deep cellular weariness that no amount of rest could fix. I was a ghost haunting my own apartment, and my reflection in the dark screen of my phone showed a pale, hollow-eyed stranger I barely recognized. Chloe came over one afternoon, using her key to let herself in when I didn't answer the door. She found me on the couch, wrapped in a blanket despite the Texas heat, staring blankly at the wall. She took one look at the stale toast on the coffee table and the dark circles under my eyes, and her face tightened with concern. This has to stop," she said, her voice soft but firm as she sat beside me and took the phone from my limp hand. "You're letting them kill you from a distance." "I just feel so sick all the time," I whispered, my voice hoarse. She put her cool hand on my forehead. You don't have a fever. She was quiet for a moment, her gaze searching. When was your last period? I waved a dismissive hand. I don't know, Chloe. A while ago. I've been a wreck. My body's all messed up because of all this. My gesture encompassed the empty apartment, the phone she held, my entire shattered life. Humor me, she insisted, her eyes holding mine. Think. I squeezed my eyes shut, forcing my foggy brain to work. The fight, the necklace, the week of walking on eggshells. The breakup. It had been more than a month, maybe 6 weeks. A new kind of cold, one that had nothing to do with grief, snaked its way through my veins. No, I whispered. It can't be. Just rule it out, okay? She said, her voice impossibly gentle. For me, please. She was the one who went to the pharmacy. I couldn't bring myself to move. She came back and handed me the small, rectangular box without a word. I walked into the bathroom like a condemned prisoner walking to the gallows. The stark white tiles and gleaming chrome fixtures felt clinical and sterile, a harsh contrast to the roiling chaos inside me. The plastic test stick felt alien in my trembling hand. The instructions said to wait 3 minutes. It was the longest 3 minutes of my existence. I paced the small space, my heart hammering against my ribs. It would be negative. It had to be. This was just another cruel trick, my body and my mind conspiring to create a new, even more exquisite form of torture. I leaned against the cool tile of the wall, my breath catching in my throat, not daring to look. Finally, I forced myself. I picked up the stick from the counter, 2 blue lines, stark. Unambiguous, undeniable. The word that formed in my mind wasn't baby, it was impossible. The world tilted, the white tiles of the bathroom floor seeming to rush up at me. I gripped the edge of the sink to steady myself. All the noise of the past few weeks, the cruel comments, Olivia's smug face, Jake's cold parting words, vanished, replaced by a roaring, deafening silence in my own head. And in the center of that silence, those 2 blue lines glowed with the intensity of a judgment. The initial shock was a physical blow, leaving me numb and breathless. But as the minutes ticked by, something else began to bubble up through the fear. It was a tiny, insane, and treacherous flicker of hope. A baby. His baby. This wasn't an anonymous comment or a snarky Instagram post. This was real. This was biology. This was a life that connected us in a way no breakup could sever. The desperate, frantic logic took hold of me, a drowning woman grasping at a piece of driftwood. He has to care about this. He talked about a family, a house with a dog, kids in the yard. He was just scared. Olivia is a fantasy, a rebound, but this is permanent. When he knows, really knows, he'll see. He'll come back. He has to. In that moment, I rebuilt our entire future. He would leave her. He would apologize, for real this time. We would be a family. This baby wasn't a catastrophe. It was a miracle. It was the key that would unlock the door back to the life I had lost. Ignoring the tiny, rational part of my brain that was screaming in protest, the part that sounded a lot like Chloe, I grabbed my phone. My fingers were trembling so badly I could barely unlock the screen. I found his number in my contacts list. I pressed the call button before I could lose my nerve. It rang once, twice, each shrill tone stretched for an eternity. I was about to hang up when the ringing stopped. "What do you want, Emma?" His voice was flat, cold, and laced with annoyance. My carefully constructed fantasy began to tremble. I took a shaky breath. "Jake, I have to tell you something. I'm busy." "Please," I whispered. "It's important." "Jake, I'm pregnant." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. For a single, agonizing second, I allowed my hope to surge. And then he spoke. And his words were not just a rejection. They were an act of war. "No, you're not," he said, his voice a low, dangerous snarl. "And if you are, it sure as hell isn't mine." "Jake, it is, you know it is." "I know you'd pull something exactly like this," he spat, the words dripping with venom. "You're trying to trap me." God, you're pathetic, you know that? Absolutely desperate. The same words. Pathetic. Desperate. The words of the anonymous trolls now coming from his mouth. The connection was undeniable, a chilling confirmation of a conspiracy I hadn't even let myself fully imagine. Let me be perfectly clear, he continued, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper that terrified me more than any shout. If you try to pin this on me, if you pursue this in any way, I will make your life hell. You think things are bad for you now? You have no idea what I'm capable of. And then he hung up. The click of the disconnected line was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of my last hope being extinguished. I stood there, phone pressed to my ear, listening to the dead air. I slowly lowered it, my hand shaking uncontrollably. The fantasy, the hope, the impossible dream of him coming back, it all evaporated, leaving behind a reality so bleak it was unbearable. A sob, raw and guttural, tore its way out of my chest. My legs gave out, and I slid down the bathroom wall until I was huddled on the cold tile floor. The sobs racked my entire body, sounds of a despair so complete it felt like it would tear me apart from the inside. My hand, as if with a mind of its own, went to my still, flat stomach. It was no longer a flicker of hope. It was a terrifying, monumental truth. I was carrying a life. A life whose father had just threatened me, had just promised to destroy me. I was no longer just a heartbroken, harassed woman. I was pregnant, trapped, and facing a war with the one person I had once believed was my entire world. And I was utterly, completely alone. The world on the other side of the bathroom door did not exist. For how long? I don't know. Time had dissolved into the singular, horrifying loop of Jake's voice in my head, the click of the disconnected line, and the frantic, useless beating of my own heart. Eventually, the gut-wrenching sobs subsided, leaving behind a hollow, echoing exhaustion. I picked myself up off the cold tile, my movements stiff and robotic. I looked at my reflection in the mirror, the pale face, the wild eyes, the tear tracks on my cheeks, and a new, terrifying clarity settled over me. This was no longer just about my broken heart. My body was no longer just my own. I was the guardian of a secret, the protector of a tiny, nascent life, and its father was the man who had just promised to make my life hell. The days that followed were lived in a thick, gray fog. I tried to stay offline. I deleted the apps from my phone, promising myself I wouldn't look. But the silence was worse. The not knowing was a different kind of madness. The compulsion, a toxic blend of addiction and a primal need to survey the battlefield, always won. Within a couple of days, I had re-downloaded everything. I told myself it was strategic, that I needed to know what they were doing. But it was self-harm, and I knew it. His threat had changed the game. The harassment, which had already felt cruel, now intensified dramatically, shifting from broad insults about my character to surgical strikes on my soul. They started using information that had only ever existed within the sacred, private space of my relationship with Jake. The first violation came on a Monday. I was scrolling numbly through my own feed, looking at old designs I'd posted, remnants of a version of myself that felt like a stranger. It was a post from almost a year ago, a complex, swirling design I had been particularly proud of. Beneath it, a new comment from a username like TruthTeller20 had appeared just minutes before. It read, "Aw, look at the little firefly thinking she's so bright." Guess your light went out. I dropped my phone. It clattered onto the hardwood floor. Firefly. No one knew that name. No one. Jake had given it to me one night as I was hunched over my laptop, my face illuminated by the screen, furiously working on a project. "You look like a little firefly," he'd whispered, kissing the top of my head. Glowing in the dark. It was our name, a secret whispered in intimacy, a term of endearment that belonged only to us. To see it now, twisted into a public taunt by a faceless stranger, felt like having a burglar break into my most private memories and scrawl graffiti all over them. My stomach heaved. This wasn't random. This was a message. A few days later, a storm rolled into Austin. The sky turned a bruised purple gray, and the wind began to howl, rattling the windows of my apartment. Thunder rumbled in the distance, a low, guttural growl that vibrated through the floorboards. I'd always been unnerved by thunderstorms, a stupid, childish fear I'd confessed to Jake one night when the power went out and we were huddled under a blanket by candlelight. It was a moment of pure vulnerability, of trusting him with a small, irrational piece of myself. As the rain began to lash against the glass, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was a post from an account I'd discovered was Olivia's Finsta, her secondary, more private account, followed by only a few hundred people. It was a photo of her rain-streaked window, looking out at the dramatic dark sky. The caption read, "Love a good storm, so cozy and powerful." Can't imagine being the kind of person who's scared of a little thunder. The air was sucked from my lungs. The timing was too perfect, too precise. It was a phantom punch, impossible to prove was aimed at me, yet I felt the impact as surely as if she had struck me. She was broadcasting my secret fear, repackaging it as a sign of her own strength and my weakness. The attacks grew more invasive, more personal. They were mining my entire life for ammunition. I had posted a picture the previous summer from a day at Barton Springs, wearing a tank top, laughing with Chloe. If you zoomed in, you could just make out a small, silvery scar on my left shoulder, a faint crescent moon left over from a clumsy fall off my bike when I was 10. It was an insignificant mark, a part of my body's history I never thought twice about. Until a new comment appeared on that photo from another anonymous troll. "Nice scar, bet there's an ugly story to go with the ugly mark." That was it. I was shaking, a primal fear mixing with a new, rising tide of rage. This was a systematic violation. They were taking the most intimate details of my life, my pet names, my fears, my body, and twisting them into weapons to be used against me. My fingers, slick with sweat, dialed Chloe's number. She answered on the second ring. "Chloe," I said, my voice frantic, words tumbling out in a rush. "It's him. It's a coordinated attack. He's telling her everything." "Whoa, Em, slow down. What happened?" I laid it all out for her, my voice rising with hysteria. The nickname, the storm post, the comment about my scar. How else could she know these things, Chloe? How? He's doing this to punish me. For the baby. He's feeding her this information. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and in that silence, my desperation clawed at me. I needed her to believe me, to validate the insanity I was living through. "Okay, Em, breathe," she said finally, her voice a calming anchor in my storm. That's horrible. It's sick." I felt a wave of relief. She believed me, but then she continued, her tone shifting to something more practical, more rational. "But we have to be logical here. The nickname, Firefly. Are you absolutely sure you never wrote it in a card or posted it somewhere online as a joke a long time ago?" "No, never," I insisted. "Okay." "And the thunderstorm thing? It's a common fear. Maybe you mentioned it to one of his friends once, at that barbecue last year. You might not even remember." "I don't think so." I trailed off, a flicker of uncertainty dousing my conviction. "And the scar, honey," she said, her voice full of sympathy. "It was in a photo you posted publicly. People on the internet are absolute creeps. They zoom in on everything. They look for things to use against people." Her words, meant to be logical and helpful, felt like a betrayal. She was offering rational explanations for what felt to me like a supernatural, malevolent conspiracy. She was planting seeds of doubt. Am I crazy? Am I paranoid? Am I just connecting dots that aren't there, driven by grief and fear? For a dizzying moment, I questioned my own sanity. Maybe Chloe was right. Maybe it was all just a string of horrible, cruel coincidences. But then, I thought of the timing, the way the attacks had escalated, how they had become so deeply personal, just days after I told Jake I was pregnant. I thought of his voice on the phone, the sheer venom in his threat. I thought of the way Olivia's posts mirrored the secret things only he knew. The seed of doubt Chloe had planted withered and died. In its place, something else took root, something hard and cold and resolute. My gut feeling, that primal instinct that had been screaming at me for weeks, was no longer just a feeling. It was a certainty. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a campaign, a calculated, vicious, and coordinated attack designed to break me. I was being hunted, and I knew, with every fiber of my being, who the hunters were. The fear was still there, a cold stone in the pit of my stomach. But now, for the first time, it was joined by a flicker of something new, a quiet, burning, and dangerous anger. The anger that took root in the ruins of my self-doubt was a strange and unfamiliar fuel. For weeks, I had been adrift in a sea of grief and fear, a passive recipient of cruelty. But now, certainty had given me a spine of steel. The fear was still there, a constant, cold companion, but it was no longer paralyzing. It was clarifying. I was no longer just a victim. I was a woman with something to protect, and I finally understood the nature of the enemy. This newfound clarity led me to a decision that, in hindsight, was born of pure desperation, a final, foolish appeal to an institution I still wanted to believe in: a mother's love. I reasoned that Jake was a master of illusion, capable of fooling anyone, his friends, his new girlfriend, the world at large. But his mother? A mother sees the truth. A mother knows her son's heart, and surely the prospect of a grandchild, her own flesh and blood, would cut through any lie, any manipulation. She would be my ally. She had to be. Chloe, ever the pragmatist, tried to warn me. When I told her my plan, she sighed, the sound heavy with concern, over the phone line. I don't know. He had to have learned that behavior somewhere. The apple doesn't usually fall far from the tree. You don't know her, Chloe, I argued, my voice tight with a conviction I was desperately trying to feel. She's always been so kind to me. She's a mother. She'll understand. I clung to the idea of Carol as a compassionate matriarch, a sensible woman who would be horrified to learn what her son was doing. I was projecting my own ideals of family and decency onto a woman I barely knew, mistaking suburban politeness for genuine warmth. So I drove to her house. It was in a quiet, manicured subdivision west of Austin, a neighborhood of handsome brick homes with perfectly green lawns and cheerful, overflowing flower beds. Carol's house was the epitome of suburban perfection, from the neatly trimmed hedges to the decorative wreath on the freshly painted front door. The house itself felt like a statement, a carefully constructed facade of normalcy and respectability that made the ugliness I was about to bring to its doorstep feel even more obscene. My heart hammered against my ribs as I walked up the stone pathway. My hands were clammy, clutching my purse strap like a lifeline. I had rehearsed my speech a dozen times on the drive over, trying to find the right words to sound credible and not, as Jake had so effectively branded me, hysterical. I rang the bell, and the cheerful melodic chimes felt like a mockery. A moment later, the door swung open. Carol stood there, dressed in crisp white linen pants and a silk blouse. Her hair was perfectly coiffed, her makeup subtle and immaculate. She looked surprised to see me, an expression that was quickly replaced by a cool, polite mask. "Emma," she said, her voice neutral. She didn't smile. She didn't move to let me in. "Carol, I'm so sorry to bother you at home," I began, my voice trembling slightly, despite my best efforts to keep it steady. "Could I please talk to you for a minute?" It's really important." She hesitated, her eyes flicking past me as if checking to see if any neighbors were watching. Finally, she stepped back with a sigh. "Fine. But I don't have much time." I stepped into her immaculate foyer. The air smelled faintly of lemon polish and potpourri. It was the scent of a life where nothing was ever out of place. We stood there, awkwardly, as I tried to summon the words I had practiced. I decided to lead with the one thing I hoped would be undeniable, the one thing that should, in a just world, make her an ally. "Carol," I started, my voice barely a whisper. "I'm pregnant. It's Jake's baby." I watched her face for any sign of emotion, shock, joy, even anger, but there was nothing. Her expression remained a carefully blank canvas. Emboldened by my desperation, I pushed on. "And I'm scared." Ever since Jake and I broke up, I've been harassed online. Vicious, personal things. And I know, Jake is involved. I think he's telling his new girlfriend what to say. I don't know who else to turn to. I thought as the baby's grandmother. I let my sentence trail off, hoping she would fill in the blank with compassion, with concern. Instead, a profound and heavy silence fell between us. The polite mask on her face slowly dissolved, but what lay beneath it wasn't warmth. It was a sheet of ice. Her eyes, so much like Jake's, hardened with a contempt that was breathtaking in its intensity. When she finally spoke, her voice was low and dripping with a disdain that physically hurt me. "I see," she said, the two words landing like stones. She took a step closer, looking me up and down as if I were something vile she had found on the bottom of her shoe. "My son told me you were unstable," she began, her voice a blade. "He told me you were emotional, that you were manipulative and prone to drama. I admit, when you two were together, I sometimes had my doubts. He seemed so happy, but now, looking at you now, showing up at my door unannounced, with these hysterical, pathetic stories." She shook her head, a small, pitying smile playing on her lips. "I see he was right all along. He saw you for what you really are." The air in my lungs turned to ice. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a verdict. She waved a dismissive hand, as if brushing away a gnat. "And this story about a baby?" "Please, trying to trap him. How predictable." "How utterly shameful. Did you really think that would work? That I would side with some manipulative little girl against my own son, my own flesh and blood?" "But it is your flesh and blood," I cried, the words tearing from my throat. "I'm carrying your grandchild." Her eyes narrowed into slits of pure venom. "You will do no such thing. You will stay away from my son. You will stay away from my family. You are not welcome here, and you will not be involving us in your sordid little dramas ever again." She turned, opened the front door, and held it, waiting for me to leave. The message was clear. I was dismissed. I was nothing. I stumbled out of the house, my body numb, the carefully chosen words of my rehearsed speech turning to ash in my mouth. The door clicked shut behind me, a sound of absolute finality. I made it to my car before my legs gave out, and I collapsed into the driver's seat, not crying, but gasping for air, my mind reeling. The drive back to Austin was a blur. The rejection I felt was profound, in some ways more devastating than Jake's. I had held on to a sliver of hope that his cruelty was an aberration, a flaw that his family would see and condemn. But as the miles passed, a horrifying, clarifying understanding dawned. Jake wasn't an anomaly. He was a product. He was a reflection. His charm, his cruelty, his masterful ability to twist reality and paint his victims as the aggressors, it wasn't a pathology he had developed on his own. It was a legacy. It had been nurtured, polished, and perfected in that pristine suburban house by the very woman who had just looked at me with such utter contempt. She wasn't just an enabler who turned a blind eye. She was the co-architect of the monster who had destroyed my life. The last door had just been slammed in my face. The last ember of hope that I could appeal to some shared sense of humanity was extinguished. I was completely and utterly on my own, and the enemy I faced wasn't just a cruel ex-boyfriend. It was his entire family, a fortress of delusion and malice, with me and my unborn child on the outside, alone in the dark. The front door clicking shut at Carol's house was the sound of my last hope dying. The cold, clear anger that had propelled me there evaporated on the drive home, leaving behind a despair so vast and empty it felt like a black hole had opened up inside my chest. It was no longer a battle. It was a foregone conclusion. The world was aligned against me. Jake, Olivia, his friends, his mother, they were a phalanx, marching in perfect, synchronized step, and I was just a single broken person in their path. I retreated into my apartment, which now felt less like a home and more like a tomb. The fight was gone. What was the point? They had already won. Carol's words echoed in my mind, a cruel mantra confirming my deepest fears. Unstable, hysterical, pathetic. The online harassment continued, a steady drip of poison, but it no longer felt like an attack. It felt like the truth. I would scroll through the comments, the pointed posts, and a numb resignation would wash over me. Of course they were right. I was a mess. Who would ever believe me? The days blurred into a gray, featureless landscape of grief. My nights were worse. I'd lie awake in the dark, one hand resting on my stomach, a gesture that was both protective and terrified. The reality of the life growing inside me was the only thing that felt real, and it was the source of my deepest terror. What kind of world was I bringing this child into? A world where its father denied its existence and its grandmother called its mother a liar? The weight of it was suffocating. It was during one of those long, sleepless nights, somewhere in the hollowed-out hours before dawn, that the shift happened. I was on my laptop, not torturing myself with social media, but adrift on the wider, anonymous ocean of the internet. I was searching for ghosts, for echoes of my own experience, typing desperate phrases into the search bar. Ex-boyfriend denies pregnancy. Harassed by new girlfriend. Family turned against me. I found myself on a series of obscure legal aid forums, reading stories from women who had been dragged through bitter, ugly custody battles. Their pain was a grim comfort. I wasn't the only one. Then I saw it. A single comment at the bottom of a long, heartbreaking thread. A woman wrote, "Don't let them grind you down. There are people who can help, even if you have no money. I was in your shoes. Call the Austin Legal Aid Society. Ask for Anya Sharma." The name just hung there on the screen. Austin Legal Aid Society. It was a tiny spark in the suffocating darkness. For a long time, I just stared at it. What was the point? I had no money for a lawyer. They would take one look at me, this emotional, pregnant wreck, and show me the door, just like Carol had. It was hopeless. But then, I felt a faint, fluttering movement inside me, a barely there tremor that might have been indigestion, but felt like a signal. "It's not for you," a voice in my head said, a voice that was stronger and clearer than my own. "It's for this baby. You can't protect yourself, but you have to protect this child." That single thought was enough. It was a lifeline. My hand, shaking so hard I could barely control it, found my phone. I Googled the number. The office wouldn't be open for hours, but I called anyway, a desperate, irrational act. It went to a generic voicemail system. After the beep, I left a message, my voice a broken, ragged whisper. "My name is Emma. I need help, please." The call back came the next morning. A calm, professional voice on the other end scheduled an appointment for the following day. The legal aid office was on a nondescript street downtown, in a building that was functional and utterly devoid of charm. It was the complete opposite of Carol's pristine home. The waiting room was clean but worn, the chairs upholstered in a durable, faded fabric. I sat there, clutching my purse, expecting to be judged, to be disbelieved. "Emma?" I looked up. A woman stood in the doorway. She was younger than I expected, perhaps in her mid-30s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She was dressed in practical, dark trousers and a simple blouse, her dark hair pulled back in a neat, efficient bun. This was Anya Sharma. There was an immediate air of calm competence about her that was so different from the emotional chaos I was used to. She led me to a small, simple office, furnished with a desk, 2 chairs, and shelves overflowing with thick legal binders. She gestured for me to sit, then sat opposite me, a legal pad and a pen on the desk between us. "The receptionist said it was an urgent family matter," she began, her voice even and calm. "Why don't you start from the beginning and tell me everything?" And so I did. The words poured out of me, a torrent of pain and confusion. I told her about Jake, the love bombing, the perfect beginning. I told her about the subtle criticisms, the coffee on the portfolio, the terrifying night he had backed me into a corner. I told her about the breakup, the appearance of Olivia, the relentless, cruel online posts. I told her about the pregnancy, about his brutal rejection on the phone, and finally, about the soul-crushing visit to his mother. I laid the entire ugly, unbelievable story at her feet, half expecting her to stop me, to tell me I was being hysterical, to say this was a personal drama, not a legal case. She never interrupted. She just listened, her gaze unwavering, her expression serious and focused. She made occasional notes on her pad, her pen scratching in the quiet room. For the first time in months, I felt like I wasn't screaming into a void. I felt heard. When I finally finished, my voice hoarse, my story hanging in the air between us, she put down her pen. Emma, she said, and her voice was filled with a firm empathy that made me want to weep with relief. Thank you for telling me all of that. I want you to hear me very clearly. What you have been through is a campaign of systematic psychological abuse. It is calculated, it is cruel, and it is designed to make you feel exactly how you feel right now. Isolated, powerless, and crazy. Hearing my reality validated so plainly by a stranger, a professional, was like a physical weight being lifted from my shoulders. She leaned forward, her focus sharpening. The online harassment, the lies, the gaslighting, they are potent weapons. But in a legal sense, they are a fog. They are designed to be untraceable, to be deniable. Proving it all in court is a long, expensive, and uncertain battle. So, we are not going to fight them in the fog. She paused, letting the words sink in. We are going to drag them out of the fog and onto solid ground. And the most solid ground we have, the one thing they cannot lie their way out of, is science. Paternity. This was the gambit. From this moment on, she continued, her voice crisp and clear, a blueprint for survival. Your job is to become a documentarian. Every harassing text, every email, every single online post from them or an anonymous account, you will screenshot it, date it, and send it to me in a file. No more engaging, no more responding. You are a collector of evidence. We are going to build a fortress of facts around you piece by piece, so high they won't be able to see over it. What then? I whispered. Then, she said, a flicker of a smile on her lips, we use the law, not in a flashy, dramatic way. In its most boring, methodical, and powerful form, we will file a petition to establish paternity. We will compel a court-ordered DNA test. We will file for child support. The law, unlike their lies, requires proof, and a DNA test is the one piece of proof they cannot manipulate. The harassment campaign becomes the context for the court, painting a picture of their character. But the paternity case is our weapon. It's clean, it's legal, and it's undeniable. I stared at her, a new feeling blooming in my chest. For months, I had been drowning in an emotional war, a battle of feelings and words where I was always losing. Anya Sharma had just handed me a new set of rules, a new strategy. It wasn't about fighting their fire with my own. It was about fighting their fire with cold, hard, methodical concrete. I walked out of that office an hour later into the bright Austin sunshine. The world hadn't changed, but I had. The suffocating blanket of despair had been replaced by something I hadn't felt in what seemed like a lifetime. It wasn't happiness, not yet, but it was something far more valuable. It was a plan. It was purpose. It was the first, fragile but unmistakable surge of hope. The first phone call I made after leaving Anya Sharma's office was to Chloe. For the first time in months, I wasn't calling her to weep or vent or wallow in my own despair. I was calling her with a plan. My voice was different. It was steady, firm, imbued with a purpose that surprised even myself. I laid out the whole strategy for her, the focus on paternity, the systematic documentation, the slow, methodical building of a case. The transformation in Chloe was instantaneous. All the rational skepticism she had previously shown, her attempts to find logical explanations for the cruelty, completely vanished. Hearing that a lawyer, an officer of the court, had not only believed my story, but had called it what it was, a campaign of systematic abuse, was the final piece of confirmation she needed. Her supportive sympathy hardened into a fierce, protective fury. Okay, she said, her voice low and intense. Okay, so we fight, not with their weapons, but with ours. Facts, data, timelines. Let's burn them to the ground with the truth. What do you need, Em? I'm all in. That evening, my quiet, grief-stricken apartment transformed into an impromptu war room. Chloe arrived with her laptop, a whiteboard she'd bought on the way, and 2 large bags of takeout, fuel, she said, for the long night ahead. We pushed my coffee table aside and spread out on the living room floor, the glow of our laptop screens casting long shadows on the walls. It was the first time my home had felt like a place of action, not just a place of sorrow. My job was agonizing. I had to become an archaeologist of my own pain, digging through the digital ruins of the past few months. I scrolled back through every text message exchange with Jake, every email, my heart clenching at the memory attached to each one. But this time, it was different. I wasn't reliving the trauma, I was mining it. Every cold dismissal, every gaslighting phrase, every veiled threat was no longer just a source of pain, but a potential data point. I took screenshots of everything, my finger tapping the screen with a new, grim determination. Chloe was the analyst, the architect of our investigation. She set up a complex spreadsheet, a grid that would become the map of my personal hell. The columns were labeled date, time, interaction type, text, call, etc. Communication with Jake, screenshot. Harassment post, screenshot. Platform, IG, Finsta, etc. Username, content, and time elapsed. She worked with a quiet, focused intensity, her fingers flying across the keyboard. For hours, we worked in silence, the only sounds the clicking of keys and the occasional, sharp intake of my breath as I uncovered a particularly painful memory. We meticulously logged every anonymous comment, every pointed Instagram story from Olivia. At first, it was just a long, depressing list of cruelty, but as Chloe populated the spreadsheet, a pattern began to emerge from the noise. A clear, undeniable, and damning correlation. The first major breakthrough came when we got to the week after I'd called Jake to tell him I was pregnant. My hands were shaking as I screenshotted his venomous replies and sent them to Chloe. She logged them into the spreadsheet. Then we cross-referenced the dates with Olivia's posts. "Oh my God," Chloe whispered, her eyes wide as she stared at her screen. She turned her laptop towards me. "Look at this." On the left side of the screen was my text to Jake, sent on a Tuesday at 9:14 p.m. "Jake, I need to be clear with you. I am pregnant, and it is yours." On the right side of the screen was a screenshot of a post from one of the anonymous troll accounts, Warrior of Light 88, time-stamped Tuesday, 9:29 p.m., exactly 15 minutes later. The comment, left on an old photo of me, read, "Some desperate people will make up any lie to trap a good man." So pathetic. He didn't even wait, I breathed, a cold sickness washing over me. He got my text, and he immediately used it as ammunition. Chloe nodded, her face grim. "He's not just telling her things, Em. He's feeding her a real-time script. We found more. Dozens of instances. A text I sent asking for my mother's old cookbook back became a post on Olivia's Finsta 30 minutes later about clingy exes who can't let go of the past. A polite, formal email I sent on Anya's advice, simply stating that her counsel would be in touch, was followed within the hour by a public tweet from Olivia, "Getting threats now. Some people have no class and no shame. #unbothered. Living my best life." He was taking every interaction, twisting its meaning, and laundering it through Olivia's accounts to paint me as the aggressor. Fueled by our findings, Chloe dug deeper. "When was the exact day he broke up with you?" she asked, pulling up a calendar. I pinpointed the date, that horrible, soul-crushing Thursday. Chloe's fingers flew across her keyboard again. She wasn't looking at recent posts anymore. She was looking at the origins of Olivia's online empire. She used a few simple online tools, not hacking, but digital forensics, checking the creation dates of Olivia's various social media profiles. After a few minutes of silent, intense clicking, she froze. "Emma?" I leaned over, my eyes fixed on her screen. She was on Olivia's main polished Instagram page. And there, in the transparent data provided by the platform itself, was the date her account was created. It was 2 days. Only 48 hours, after Jake had walked out of my life. We both stared at the screen in silence. The implication was chilling. This hadn't been a whirlwind romance he fell into after he left me. This was a planned succession. The infrastructure for his new life, with his new, perfect girlfriend, was already being built before his side of our bed was even cold. The breakup, the immediate public debut of his new relationship, the ensuing harassment. It wasn't a series of unfortunate events. It was a strategy. A premeditated campaign. By the time the sun began to rise, casting a pale gray light into the living room, we had it, a dossier. A timeline of digital breadcrumbs that told an undeniable story. It was a map of the conspiracy they had mounted against me. Looking at it all laid out, the cold, hard data in Chloe's spreadsheet wasn't re-traumatizing. It was vindicating. It was the ultimate validation. It was proof that I wasn't crazy, that I hadn't imagined a single thing. I opened my email, my movements now calm and deliberate. I attached the spreadsheet file, a document filled with a meticulous record of my pain. I sent it to Anya Sharma. In the body of the email, I wrote only 5 words. Here is the beginning. Anya Sharma's office felt different this time. When I had first walked in, it was a sanctuary from my chaotic emotional storm. Now, it felt like a command center. The dossier Chloe and I had compiled was spread across her desk, a meticulously organized testament to my torment. Anya didn't look at it with pity. She looked at it with the cool, appraising eye of a strategist. "This is excellent work," she said, her tone professional, but with an undercurrent of genuine respect. "The pattern is undeniable and damning. They've grown arrogant. They believe you are isolated and have no recourse. That arrogance is a vulnerability we can exploit." She leaned back in her chair, her gaze fixed on me. "They believe they control the narrative. So we need to give them an opportunity to perform that narrative in a controlled environment, a place where we are listening." And so the plan was born. It was a gambit, designed to turn their greatest weapon, their coordinated campaign of psychological abuse, against them. Anya's instructions were precise. "You will text Jake and ask to meet him in a public place, a coffee shop. Tell him you want to discuss the baby in person to avoid further miscommunication. He won't be able to resist the opportunity to condescend to you, and he will bring her. Olivia won't let him meet you alone. She's too insecure and controlling for that." Chloe's role was just as critical. She would be our invisible witness. She would arrive at the chosen coffee shop 30 minutes early, secure a table with a clear line of sight, and place her phone on the table, a textbook and a half-empty mug beside it. The native voice memo app would be running, a silent, unobtrusive ear. My part was the most difficult. "You are not there to fight, Emma," Anya stressed, her dark eyes intense. "You are not there to win an argument or to get an apology. You are there as an actress. Your role is to be calm, composed, and factual. You will not cry. You will not raise your voice. You will not give them the hysterical, emotional woman they expect. You are there to lay a very specific piece of bait." She pointed to the screenshot of the last text I had sent Jake, the one he had never replied to, where I had confessed the name I was considering for the baby. "This," Anya said, tapping the screen. "The name Lily. It is a piece of information that only he possesses. It's a secret between the two of you. It is the perfect bait." The day of the confrontation, my heart felt like a trapped bird beating against my ribs. We chose a bustling but not deafening coffee shop on the edge of downtown, a neutral territory for all of us. As I walked in, the familiar smells of roasted coffee and steamed milk did nothing to calm my nerves. Then I saw her. Chloe was settled in a corner booth, engrossed in a book, her phone lying innocently on the table. She glanced up as I entered, and her eyes met mine for a fleeting second, a silent transmission of strength and solidarity. I took a deep breath and chose a small table for 2 near the center of the room. They arrived 5 minutes later, a united front of polished condescension. Jake looked handsome and weary, a man burdened by the drama of a lesser being. Olivia was flawless, her makeup perfect, her expression a careful blend of concern and pity. They moved with the easy confidence of people who believed they held all the cards. "Emma," Jake said, his voice heavy with a sigh as they sat down. "I'm glad you reached out. This has all gone too far." I followed Anya's script, my voice a marvel of calm I did not feel. "Thank you for meeting me. I won't take much of your time. I just wanted to inform you in person, to avoid any more misinterpretation, that I am keeping the baby. And my lawyer, Anya Sharma, will be filing the official court documents to establish paternity and arrange for child support." It was exactly the provocation Anya had predicted. Olivia scoffed, a delicate, insulting sound. Jake shook his head, a look of profound disappointment on his face. "Emma, listen to yourself," he said, his voice dripping with faux concern. "We've been over this. There is no baby." You need professional help. We're really worried about you." "This obsession isn't healthy," Olivia chimed in, her voice like smooth, poisoned honey. "For you to keep this up, to invent a lawyer, it's truly sad. We just want you to move on and find peace." They were performing their well-rehearsed duet, reinforcing their narrative, painting me as the delusional hysteric. I let them finish. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the water I had ordered. I set the glass down gently. My hands were perfectly steady. "You can believe what you want," I said, my voice soft but clear, ensuring it was just loud enough to be heard over the cafe's murmur. "But this baby is very real, and I've already picked out a name for her." I paused, locking my eyes on Jake, and then let my gaze drift to Olivia. "I'm going to call her Lily." For a heartbeat, there was silence. I saw a flicker of something in Jake's eyes, not guilt, but the discomfort of a liar confronted with an undeniable piece of his own history. He knew where that name came from. But before he could formulate a response, Olivia leaned forward, her polished mask slipping to reveal the raw, vicious cruelty beneath. She saw an opportunity to land a final, crushing blow, and her arrogance made her careless. She sneered, her voice a low, contemptuous rasp. "Lily. How pathetic." She glanced at Jake, a triumphant little smirk on her face. "Jake told me you'd pick something hopelessly romantic like that. It's as weak as you are." The world went quiet. The ambient noise of the coffee shop, the hiss of the espresso machine, the murmur of conversations, it all faded into a dull, distant roar. She had said it. She had confessed. With smug satisfaction, she had just admitted, on what I knew was an active recording, that Jake had taken a private, emotional confession I had made to him via text message just a week prior and had shared it with her for the sole purpose of ridicule. The direct, undeniable link between them, the proof of their coordinated campaign, was no longer just a series of digital breadcrumbs. It was a spoken confession caught in the air between us. I didn't react. I didn't gasp. I didn't flinch. I slowly, deliberately, lifted my gaze from Olivia's faltering smile and met Chloe's eyes across the room. Chloe gave a single, almost imperceptible nod, her hand resting calmly near the phone on the table. "We have it." I pushed my chair back and stood up, my movements fluid and composed. "Thank you for your time," I said, my voice as cool and clear as ice. I turned my back on them and walked towards the door, never looking back. I could feel their eyes on me. I could almost hear the gears turning in Jake's head as the horror of what Olivia had just done began to dawn on him. I could imagine the smug certainty draining from Olivia's face, replaced by a flicker of confusion, a nascent fear that she had just made a terrible, irretrievable mistake. As I stepped out of the coffee shop and into the bright, indifferent sunshine, I felt a tremor run through me. It wasn't a tremor of fear or sadness. It was the tremor of a seismic shift, the feeling of a power dynamic that had just been irrevocably and completely reversed. I held the key, and I was finally ready to unlock their prison. The recording was crystal clear. Chloe and I listened to it huddled together in my living room, the windows dark, the only light coming from the phone's screen. Olivia's voice, dripping with smug contempt, filled the silence. "Lily? How pathetic. Jake told me you'd pick something hopelessly romantic like that." It was a perfect confession, delivered with an arrogance that had become their fatal flaw. We sent the audio file to Anya immediately. Her call came less than an hour later. Her voice was different, stripped of its comforting, professional calm. It was now the voice of a predator that had tasted blood. It was sharp, cold, and utterly confident. "We have them, Emma," she said, and the certainty in her tone sent a shiver down my spine. "This is irrefutable. It's proof of direct collusion, malicious intent, and it establishes a pattern of behavior that is legally indefensible. I'm amending our petition. And I am deposing them both." She explained what that meant. It wasn't a trial. It was a formal, sworn testimony in a private conference room. A court reporter would be there, transcribing every word. Lying under oath was perjury, a felony. "This is where we break them," Anya said, her voice like flint. Before they ever set foot in a courtroom. The day of the deposition, The air in the law office conference room was thick and suffocating. The room was aggressively neutral. A long, polished mahogany table, 12 identical leather chairs, a water pitcher, sweating condensation, and at the far end, a silent court reporter sitting before her stenotype machine. It was a sterile arena, designed for brutal dissections of the truth. I sat beside Anya, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. My role today was simply to exist, to be a silent, breathing testament to the reality they had tried so hard to deny. Across the table, Jake and Olivia sat next to their lawyer, a slick, expensive-looking man who seemed more annoyed than concerned. Jake fidgeted with his tie, his gaze darting around the room, avoiding mine. Olivia, however, was a master of composure. She had donned her polished mask of serene victimhood, her expression radiating a kind of pained forbearance. She was here, her posture screamed, to once again endure the drama of the unstable woman across the table. Anya began calmly, her voice even as she methodically established the timeline of our relationship, the breakup, the basic, undisputed facts. Jake and Olivia answered her questions with their practiced, sanitized narrative. Yes, the relationship had ended. Yes, it was because of my emotional instability. Yes, he had moved on quickly, and Olivia had been a beacon of supportive light. Then Anya shifted gears. She produced the dossier Chloe and I had compiled, now bound and marked as an exhibit. She walked them through the timeline of the online harassment, her questions quiet but relentless. "Ms. Hayes," Anya said, her eyes fixed on Olivia. "Are you the owner of the Instagram account with the handle Livy Loves Light?" "I am," Olivia said, her voice smooth. "And are you also the owner of the secondary, more private account with the handle Just Live Things?" A flicker of surprise in Olivia's eyes. "Yes." "And are you familiar with the anonymous account, Warrior of Light 88? "Of course not," Olivia said with a dismissive laugh. "I'm the one who's been harassed, Ms. Sharma. My followers are constantly defending me from Miss Peterson's followers." She was committing to the lie, just as Anya had predicted. She was weaving her own noose. "I see," Anya said, her voice dangerously soft. "Let's talk about a meeting that took place 3 weeks ago, at the Mozart Coffee Roasters. Do you recall that meeting, Mr. Miller?" Jake mumbled a yes. "And you were there as well, Ms. Hayes?" "I was there to support Jake," Olivia said, her voice dripping with false nobility. "He was very concerned about Emma's mental state." "And do you recall a discussion about a name for Mrs. Peterson's unborn child?" Olivia's lips curled into a faint, pitying smile. "I recall her rambling about a number of delusional things, yes." Anya nodded slowly. She turned to the court reporter. "I would like to play a digital audio recording, marked as Exhibit A." She placed a small speaker on the table and pressed play. My own voice, soft but clear, filled the silent room. "I'm going to call her Lily." Then, after a beat, Olivia's sneering reply. "Lily? How pathetic." "Jake told me you'd pick something hopelessly romantic like that. It's as weak as you are." The color drained from Olivia's face. Her carefully constructed mask didn't just crack, it shattered. Her lawyer stared at her, his mouth agape. Jake looked down at the polished table as if he wanted it to swallow him whole. The air in the room had become electric. "Ms. Hayes," Anya's voice was like a whip crack, "you just testified, under oath, that you have no connection to any anonymous accounts. Yet this recording proves that Mr. Miller shared the contents of a private text message with you and that you used that private information to mock Ms. Peterson. Are you now willing to admit that you and Mr. Miller have been engaged in a coordinated campaign to harass and intimidate my client?" Olivia's lawyer started to object, but Anya cut him off. "Your client is on record. I suggest you advise her to stop digging this hole any deeper." With their credibility annihilated, Anya moved in for the final, devastating revelation. She produced another exhibit. It was a series of screenshots from a password-protected blog. "Ms. Hayes, can you identify this website?" Anya asked. Olivia was silent, her face pale and clammy. "Perhaps you can, Mr. Miller. The title of the blog is Our Journey to Justice, Rescuing Baby M. That M stands for Miller, correct?" Jake didn't look up. He just gave a small, defeated nod. The full, monstrous truth was then unspooled, thread by thread, under Anya's piercing interrogation. The blog was their private dossier. It was filled with screenshots of my most emotional text messages, which they had deliberately provoked. It contained their own self-serving journal entries, where Jake wrote about his fear of me, and Olivia wrote about her bravery in the face of my unhinged obsession. It was a meticulously crafted alternate reality designed for an audience of one, a family court judge. And what was the purpose of this blog, Mr. Miller? Anya pressed, her voice relentless. Jake finally looked up, his eyes hollow and defeated. It was evidence, he mumbled. Our lawyer said, if we could prove a pattern of instability, we could sue for full custody. The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't just about hurting me. It wasn't just about driving me crazy. It was about taking my child. It was about erasing me from my own baby's life, painting me as an unfit mother so that he could play the role of the heroic father, with Olivia as the perfect sainted stepmother. But Anya wasn't finished. She turned her attention back to Olivia. And after you had won custody, Ms. Hayes, what was the plan then? This journey you were documenting, it reads like a book proposal. Wasn't it your intention to eventually take this story public? To monetize it? Perhaps a book deal, a series of sponsored posts about parental alienation, a GoFundMe for the legal fees you endured fighting for this child? The look on Olivia's face, a mixture of horror and naked ambition, was all the confession Anya needed. The deposition was over. They were not just exposed, they were buried under the weight of their own calculated cruelty. I sat there in the sterile conference room, the silence ringing in my ears. I felt no rush of triumph, no satisfying surge of victory. All I felt was a profound, nauseating sickness. The sheer, premeditated depth of their depravity was beyond anything I could have imagined. They hadn't just wanted to hurt me. They had wanted to annihilate me, to steal my child, and then to profit from my destruction. Anya placed a gentle hand on my arm, her touch grounding me in the silent, sterile room. It's over, Emma, she said softly. They've buried themselves. The revelation was complete, and it was infinitely more monstrous than my darkest fears. The silence in the conference room after the deposition was a heavy, suffocating blanket. The court reporter packed up her machine, her movements quiet and unobtrusive. Jake and Olivia were ushered out by their shell-shocked lawyer, their faces ashen, their arrogance replaced by the raw, vacant look of total defeat. They didn't look at me. They couldn't. I remained seated next to Anya, my hands still clasped so tightly my knuckles were white. I felt no triumph. There was no cathartic release of anger, no satisfying taste of revenge. There was only a deep, hollow sickness, the kind that comes from having stared directly into the abyss of human cruelty and seeing it stare back. It was one thing to suspect their malice, to piece together the breadcrumbs of their conspiracy. It was another entirely to hear them confess it, to understand the cold, calculated premeditation behind their plan to not just ruin me, but to erase me from my own child's life, and then profit from the story. What happens now? I asked, my voice barely a whisper in the silent room. Anya's expression was grim, but her hand on my arm was firm and steady. Now, she said, the system does its work. They had their chance to tell the truth. Instead, they committed perjury and confessed to a conspiracy to commit fraud upon the court. Their lawyer will beg us to settle, to seal the records and let this all go away quietly. We will not be doing that. There was no dramatic trial. There didn't need to be. The deposition transcript, a nearly 200-page document detailing their lies, their admissions, and their monstrous plan, was filed with the family court of Travis County. It was a legal bomb, and its detonation was quiet, procedural, and absolute. The final court date was on a gray, overcast morning a few months later. I was visibly pregnant now, a gentle, protective curve to my belly that I rested my hand upon as we sat at the plaintiff's table. The courtroom was nearly empty, the atmosphere subdued and businesslike. Across the room, Jake and Olivia sat with their lawyer. They looked smaller, diminished. The polished, confident sheen they had always worn had been stripped away, leaving behind something pale and brittle. They looked like ghosts. The judge, a stern, sharp-eyed woman in her 60s, had already reviewed the entire case file. Our dossier, the DNA test results that unequivocally proved Jake's paternity, and the damning deposition transcript. She looked at Jake and Olivia, not with anger, but with a cold, undisguised contempt that seemed to make them shrink even further in their seats. There was no argument. There was only the verdict. In the matter of Peterson versus Miller, the judge began, her voice crisp and authoritative, filling the quiet room. This court has reviewed the evidence presented by both parties, including the sworn testimony given during depositions. The paternity of the unborn child, to be named Lily Rain Peterson, is hereby legally and irrevocably established as belonging to the respondent, Mr. Jacob Miller. She paused, her gaze sweeping over them. Furthermore, this court finds overwhelming and disturbing evidence of a premeditated and malicious campaign of psychological abuse, online harassment, and a conspiracy to knowingly commit fraud upon this court in future custody proceedings. This behavior demonstrates a profound lack of moral character and an absolute disregard for the well-being of both the mother and the child. Every word was a nail being hammered into their coffin. Therefore, the judge continued, her voice leaving no room for appeal, the court grants sole legal and physical custody of the child to the petitioner, Ms. Emma Peterson. A permanent restraining order is hereby issued against both Mr. Jacob Miller and Ms. Olivia Hayes, effective immediately. You are to have no contact, direct, indirect, or through a third party, with Mrs. Peterson or her child. Any violation of this order will be met with the severest possible legal consequences. This court's primary duty is to protect the child, and it is clear that the greatest protection I can offer this child is a life completely free of your influence. It was over. There was no dramatic bang of the gavel, just the quiet rustle of the clerk stamping the order. It wasn't an explosion. It was, as Anya had promised, a quiet, complete, and legally binding dismantling of their power. The fallout beyond the courtroom walls was equally swift. Somehow, the story found its way to an Austin-based journalist who specialized in online culture. The headline read, "Local influencer implicated in shocking custody conspiracy." The article was brutal and factual, quoting directly from the now public court records, the deposition, the blog, the judge's searing verdict. Olivia's carefully curated world imploded overnight. The brands that sponsored her dropped her in a flood of press releases. Her comment sections, once filled with fawning adoration, became a tidal wave of disgust and outrage. Her career, built on a foundation of manufactured authenticity, was destroyed by a single, unavoidable truth. Jake's downfall was quieter, but no less complete. He became a pariah in his own social circles, the story of his cruelty spreading like a virus among the people whose admiration he craved. I watched it all happen from a distance, feeling strangely detached. There was no joy in their ruin, no thrill in their public shaming. There was only a profound sense of closure. It was the natural, inevitable consequence of their own choices. My focus was no longer on their world. It was on mine. That evening, I sat in my quiet apartment. The constant, anxious buzz from my phone had finally ceased. I had blocked their names, their accounts, their entire digital universe. The war was over. In the corner of my living room, a rocking chair sat beside a newly assembled crib. I held a small, soft baby blanket in my hands, folding and refolding it, the simple, repetitive motion, a kind of meditation. The feeling that settled over me wasn't elation or triumph. It was something far more precious, something I hadn't felt in what felt like a lifetime. It was peace. A quiet, fragile, and absolute peace. The verdict hadn't been a loud, celebratory explosion. It had been the soft, final click of a lock on a door, securing the future for me and my daughter and locking them out of our lives forever. I placed my hands on my belly, feeling the gentle, reassuring kick from within. We were finally, truly, safe. The quiet that settled in my apartment in the days following the verdict was more than just the absence of noise. It was the foundation upon which I built the rest of my life. It was the fertile ground where fear had once grown, now tilled and ready for something new. That peace was the first real home my daughter ever knew, a sanctuary I built for us, one quiet day at a time. The years that followed were not always easy, but they were ours. They were real, and they were free. Decades have passed since then. The vibrant, chaotic city of Austin has grown and changed around me, and I have grown and changed with it. The young woman with the haunted eyes, the one who navigated a war she never asked for, has softened with time, her story etched into the fine lines around my own eyes and mouth. The afternoon sun is warm on my back, filtering through the broad leaves of a magnolia tree. I am sitting on a simple wooden bench in my garden, a place I have cultivated for over 30 years. It is my sanctuary, a chaotic and beautiful tapestry of life. Resilient climbing roses, their thorns hidden beneath velvety petals, snake their way up a weathered trellis. Lavender bushes hum with the drowsy buzz of happy bees. The air smells of rich earth, fragrant gardenias, a scent I have reclaimed as my own, and the sweet, clean perfume of sunlight on stone. This garden, with its deep roots and its vibrant, stubborn life, is the truest reflection of my own story. In my lap rests a journal, its leather cover worn smooth with use. I am just finishing the last few lines of a letter I have been writing for a very long time. My pen scratches softly against the thick, creamy paper. My dearest Lily, you have asked me over the years about your father. I have always given you simple, truthful answers. He was a man I once knew. He gave me the greatest gift of my life, you, and he is not a part of our story. All of which is true, but I knew that one day you would be old enough to understand the whole truth. Not his story, but the story of us, and of how we truly began. I have written it all down for you in these pages. It is a difficult story, filled with shadows and pain, and my first instinct as your mother has always been to shield you from such things, but I am not writing this for you to carry my pain. That burden was mine alone, and I set it down long ago. Pain is not a legacy to be passed from one generation to the next. Strength is. Resilience is. Love is. I wrote this so that you would understand the foundation upon which your life was built. You see, my darling girl, you were not born from tragedy. You were born from the decision to fight. You were not the consequence of a man's cruelty, but the consequence of a mother's refusal to be broken. You were my reason, my courage, my quiet verdict against a world that had tried to silence me. He gave you his DNA. That is a random, biological fact, as meaningless as a single grain of sand on an infinite beach. But I gave you your life. I gave you your strength, your spirit, your compassion, your unshakable confidence, your joyous laugh that can light up an entire room. I fought to give you a world of peace and sunlight, a world where you could grow, whole and unbroken. And that, my daughter, is the only legacy that truly matters. I sign my name at the bottom, Mama, and close the journal. A sense of finality and peace settling over me. A shadow falls over the page, and I look up. She is here. My Lily. She is a woman now, warm and confident with my eyes and a smile that is entirely her own, free from any of the shadows that once haunted mine. She is carrying 2 mugs of iced tea, and she hands one to me, the glass cool against my skin. She sits beside me on the bench, her presence as comforting and familiar as the garden itself. Her gaze falls on the journal in my lap. "Is that?" she asks softly, her voice filled with a gentle understanding. I nod, my own smile meeting hers. "It is. It's for you. For whenever you feel you are ready for it." I hold the journal out to her. She takes it, her fingers brushing against mine. She doesn't open it. She just holds it to her chest for a moment, then sets it down beside her on the bench. She reaches over and takes my hand, her grip firm and warm. We sit there together, in the comfortable silence of a love that needs no words, our hands intertwined. The sun dips lower, casting long, peaceful shadows across the grass. From the house, I can hear the distant, happy shrieks of my grandchildren playing, their laughter carried on the warm breeze. This is the ultimate victory. Not a dramatic courtroom triumph, not a vengeful satisfaction, but this quiet moment, this beautiful, ordinary, hard-won peace. This life I built, not from the ashes of my past, but from the strength I found there. We sit together, mother and daughter, surrounded by the thriving, vibrant life of the garden, a quiet testament to the enduring truth that the most powerful force in the world is not the cruelty of those who seek to break us, but the stubborn, resilient love that refuses to let them win.